You're not even half the woman my mother is." My daughter-in-law Olivia's voice was dripping with pure venom. The sentence just hung there in the dining room air, sharp and cold as an icicle. She thought I was just a fragile old lady, an 85-year-old relic ready to be tossed in a corner somewhere. But when I pushed my chair back, the creak of the wood on the floor wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a promise. They had no idea who I really was. The scene, the exact moment, was at our traditional Sunday dinner right here in my house. I was sitting at the head of the table, in my usual spot, when Olivia dropped that little gem. She'd just mocked my idea of going to a charity ball, comparing it to her mother, who chaired the board of some fancy museum. I looked at my son, Michael, waiting for him to say something, anything. But he just sat there, his head down, and his silence was the final stab. And that's when she looked at me with that cruel little smirk and said the line that changed everything. In that moment, something inside me, a force I'd kept dormant for almost 50 years, finally woke up. The years of swallowing insults to keep the peace, they were over. But for you to understand how things got to this absurd point, to all this hatred inside my own home, let me introduce myself properly. I'm Angela, I'm 85 years old, and I live here in Nashville, Tennessee. Until pretty recently, my biggest worry was whether the Sunday roast was cooked through. My story, my real story, doesn't start in this huge, silent house. It starts in a garage with the smell of hot metal, cheap coffee, and dreams that seemed too big for the world. It starts with James. I met James in college back in the 60s. He was an engineering student with a smile that could take apart any engine, and I was the top student in the physics department. While the other girls were worried about frat parties, I was fascinated by the invisible forces that governed the universe, by the elegant mathematics that ruled the stars. James was the first person who didn't look at me like I was some kind of freak. He didn't see a future wife. He saw a brilliant mind. We'd spend hours debating quantum theory, sketching out prototypes on napkins in cheap diners that smelled like fried food. He was my intellectual partner, my equal in every single way. We didn't talk about marriage or kids. We talked about changing the world. And it was back then, between calculus books and sleepless nights, that the idea for Apex Innovations was born. The idea, to be honest, was mine. I had developed a revolutionary microfabrication process, a way to create computer components that were smaller and more powerful than anything that existed on the market. It was pure theory, a beautiful equation on paper. But James, with that engineering genius of his, looked at my calculations and said, "Angela, I can build this." He knew how to turn my theory into reality. And just like that, our garage became the birthplace of an empire. In those early years, we lived in a cramped apartment above a bakery. The smell of yeast and sugar was constant, a sweet soundtrack to our 19-20-hour workdays. I was the chief scientist, the lead inventor. My name was on the initial patents, my handwriting on the blueprints that would become the foundation of a billion-dollar company. James was the face of the company, the charismatic salesman who could charm investors and build a team. We were a perfect partnership. He never, not for 1 second, made me feel like I was in his shadow. We were two pillars, building our future side by side, brick by brick. I remember it like it was yesterday, the day he landed our first big contract, a $250,000 deal with a tech company in California. He came back to the garage, his tie crooked, his face flushed with victory. He lifted me off the ground and spun me around amidst the scattered tools and circuit boards, laughing. "We did it, Angela. You did it. Your mind is going to change the world," he said, his eyes shining with a love and respect that to me was worth more than any stock on the market. In that moment, I felt like there was nothing in the universe we couldn't conquer together. But the universe, as I well knew from my physics, has a funny and sometimes cruel way of changing the rules of the game. And the biggest change of all was about to happen. That's when I found out I was pregnant with Michael. When I held Michael in my arms for the first time in that antiseptic-smelling hospital in 1970, I felt a shift in my universe as profound as any law of physics I'd ever studied. That tiny, perfect little being redefined my center of gravity. I tried to do it all, to be the chief scientist by day and the perfect mother by night. I spent my days in the lab, my mind a whirlwind of equations and semiconductors, and my nights nursing Michael, singing him lullabies while my brain was still trying to solve some heat dissipation problem in our prototypes. But the world back then, in the early 70s, wasn't made for women like me. There were no flexible hours, no corporate daycare, no working from home. It was one or the other. The guilt was a constant companion. If I was at the lab, I felt like I was abandoning my son. If I was at home, I felt like I was abandoning my work, my other child. I was exhausted, torn between the two great loves of my life. James saw the toll it was taking on me. He saw the dark circles under my eyes, the way my hand would tremble from exhaustion when I reached for a cup of coffee. One night, I was sitting at the kitchen table. It was almost 2 a.m. On one side of the table was an open physics book, on the other, a baby bottle. I must have dozed off for a second because I jumped when I felt his hands on my shoulders. "Angela," he said, in that gentle voice that always calmed me, "you don't have to do this. You don't have to destroy yourself like this. You've already given us the foundation. The patents are yours. The core technology is yours. You built the engine. Let me steer the ship for a while. Be a mom. Enjoy our son. Time goes by way too fast." Every word was full of love, but to me, it sounded like a death sentence. To leave the work that defined me, the thrill of discovery, the intellectual challenge. It was like asking me to stop breathing. But then I looked at Michael's little face, sleeping peacefully in the cradle James had built, and I knew I couldn't miss his first steps, his first words, his first "mama." So I made a choice. I sacrificed my career for my family. But James and I weren't an ordinary couple, and this wasn't an ordinary decision. We sat down with our first lawyer, a sharp young man named Christopher Brooks, and drafted a legal agreement. It was our secret. I would step back from my public role at Apex Innovations, signing over my voting rights to James. He would be the face and the voice of the company. But, on paper, in documents locked away, I would retain my 52% majority ownership of the company. It was a safety net, an acknowledgement of my foundational contribution, something that, in my naivety, I never thought I'd need to use. I dove headfirst into motherhood, and it was the most incredible journey I could have imagined. I taught Michael to read using my old physics books. We built model rockets in the backyard, and I'd explain the constellations to him on clear Tennessee summer nights. This house, the very one Olivia finds so depressing, was bought with the company's first real profits. James and I designed it together. The big office, which later became James's office, wasn't just his. It was ours. The shelves were filled with my books just as much as his. The desk had 2 chairs, one for him, one for me. And for many years, even away from the day-to-day of the company, I remained his secret advisor. It was me he called when he had a technical problem no one else could solve. It was me he celebrated every victory with. I never regretted my choice. Watching Michael grow into a smart, kind young man was a different kind of reward, a different creation, but just as fulfilling. I thought I had built something solid, a family, a legacy. When he brought Olivia home for the first time about 15 years ago, I was hopeful. She was beautiful, ambitious, with a degree in art history. I thought she'd be a partner for him, like I was for James. I welcomed her into my home, into my heart. I taught her the family recipes, the ones my mother taught me. I told her stories about Michael's childhood, gave her the pearl necklace that had been my mother's. I wanted her to feel like part of the family. For years, I chose to see only what I wanted to see. I ignored her snide remarks, chalking them up to the brashness of youth. I interpreted her ambition as a desire to build a good life for my son. I truly thought that by giving love and kindness, I would receive the same in return. What a mistake. What a naive, monumental mistake. When James passed away 6 years ago, my world fell apart. It was a massive heart attack, way too fast. One day he was here, laughing and planning our trip to Italy. The next, he was gone. At the funeral, I clung to Michael and Olivia, believing we would face the future together, a family united by grief. I was a fool. I, a woman who understood the laws of the universe, had forgotten the most fundamental one of all. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. My years of sacrifice, of putting myself in the background, hadn't created a bond of love and respect. They had created a vacuum of greed and entitlement that Olivia was more than ready to fill. And my own son was going to hold the door open for her. James's funeral was the hardest thing I've ever been through. I held on to Michael and Olivia, my son's face puffy from a cry he was trying to hold back, and my daughter-in-law. She was the picture of a perfect grieving widow. She cried at all the right moments, held my hand with a firmness that said she was there to support me. In that fog of grief, I believed it. I believed that the three of us, what was left of our family, would pull through together. I was a fool. I, a woman who spent her life studying the laws of the universe, forgot the most fundamental of all. Nature abhors a vacuum. And my grief, my vulnerability, my decision to step back and let my son take the lead at the company I created, all of it created a power vacuum. And Olivia, Olivia was more than ready to fill it, with a greed that I, in my pain, was too blind to see. After James died, the changes were subtle at first, as subtle as the tide coming in. You don't notice it until the water is already up to your knees. Olivia's visits became more frequent, but the energy was different. She didn't come for tea and a chat anymore. She came to inspect. She'd walk through my house with the air of a real estate appraiser, her eyes scanning the furniture, the paintings, the silver. Her compliments always came with a hidden barb, wrapped in a thin layer of concern. "Wow, Angela, this Persian rug is gorgeous. Must be worth a fortune. You really should have it professionally appraised and insured," she'd say, her tone implying I was some senile old woman, incapable of managing my own belongings. Little by little, she started to isolate me. It was methodical, calculated. My old friends, the wives of James's former partners, people I'd played bridge with for 30 years, would call the house. And Olivia, who had started answering the home phone as if it were her own, would say in a sweet, concerned voice, "Oh, Angela's resting right now. She hasn't been feeling up to visitors. I'll pass along the message." The messages, of course, never arrived. She intercepted the mail, too. I'd see the stacks of letters on the side table. "It's just more bills and junk mail, Angela. I'll sort through it for you later. Don't you worry about it," she'd say. I know now what she was looking for. Bank statements, insurance policies, any document that could give her a clearer picture of my assets. And Michael, my son, he was her willing accomplice. He'd come to visit, but he was always distracted, his eyes seeking Olivia's approval before he said anything. Our easy, loving conversations about science, about life, were replaced by uncomfortable interrogations about my finances. "Mom, are you sure you're on top of everything? Dad's investment portfolio is pretty complex. Maybe you should let a professional handle it. Olivia's cousin works at a top-tier investment firm in Atlanta," he'd suggest. The phrase Olivia's cousin, or a friend of Olivia's, became a constant. She was slowly inserting her people into every corner of my life, building a cage around me with bars of fake concern. The insults became more direct, always disguised as jokes. For my 84th birthday, I wore a vintage Chanel suit James had bought me in London in the 80s. It was a timeless, elegant piece. Olivia looked me up and down and said, loud enough for several guests to hear, "How wonderful that you still have the energy to play dress-up, Angela. It's so theatrical." The word just hung there, theatrical, implying I was a silly old woman playing make-believe, not the matriarch of the family. Michael just gave a nervous laugh and changed the subject. His cowardice was a physical pain in my chest. Their attempt to control my life went beyond money. They started making decisions about my house. One day I came downstairs to find a strange man in the garden, measuring the old oak tree that James and I planted when Michael was born. Olivia was with him, pointing and talking excitedly. "Oh, Angela, we're just getting a quote for some landscaping," she said, all bright and bubbly when she saw me. "This old tree blocks so much light. A nice modern patio would be much more practical." The thought of cutting down that tree, a living monument to my life with James, made me sick to my stomach. But when I protested, Michael pulled me aside. "Mom, Be reasonable. It's just a tree. Olivia has a wonderful vision for the garden. Her vision, not mine, not the memories of a lifetime, but the most painful moments. The ones that truly broke me inside were when they rewrote my own history right in front of me. We were at a dinner with some of Michael's business partners, heavy hitters in the tech industry. The conversation, inevitably, turned to the founding of Apex Innovations. One of the guests, a man named Mr. Peterson, asked about the company's origins. Before I could even open my mouth, Olivia launched into a romanticized, completely fabricated story. "Oh, it was all James," she said, her voice full of a fake admiration that turned my stomach. "He was a lone genius, toiling away in a garage. Angela was his support, of course, a wonderful homemaker. She made sure he had a hot meal on the table so he could go on and change the world. She reduced me to a cook. She erased my mind, my contributions, my very essence from the story of my own life." I looked at Michael, waiting, pleading with my eyes for him to correct her, to defend my honor, the truth. He just smiled and nodded, basking in the reflected glory of a father he barely understood. He was selling my legacy, and his own, for a quiet life and his wife's approval. In that moment, watching the two of them perform this charade, I wasn't a widow anymore. I was a ghost in my own house. My presence was tolerated only as long as I remained silent and invisible. They weren't just waiting for me to die. They were actively trying to erase any evidence that I had ever truly lived. The moment of absolute clarity, the instant the last veil of denial was ripped from my eyes, didn't come in the middle of a screaming match or a dramatic confrontation. It arrived quietly on a Tuesday afternoon, disguised as a gesture of care. For weeks, Michael and Olivia had been insisting I see a new doctor, a Dr. Adrian Wesley, whom they described as a specialist in geriatric wellness. My doctor of over 30 years, Dr. Thompson, had retired, and they'd seized the opportunity. "He's the best, Mom," Michael had insisted over the phone. "He makes house calls. You won't even have to leave your comfy armchair." The idea of a doctor I didn't know coming into my home felt like a violation, an invasion. But I was tired of fighting every little thing, tired of being the stubborn old woman. So I agreed. Dr. Wesley was a tall, unnervingly polished man with cold hands and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He arrived promptly at 3 o'clock. Michael and Olivia greeted him at the door like they were welcoming a dignitary. The doctor asked me a series of patronizing questions, speaking slowly, as if I were a child. "And do we remember what we had for breakfast, Angela? Are we having any trouble with confusion?" He checked my blood pressure, listened to my heart, his movements efficient and impersonal. Michael and Olivia hovered in the background, their faces masks of a strange solemnity, as if they were at a wake. After the brief exam, Dr. Wesley sat down at my desk, the same desk where James and I had spent so many nights designing the future. "Your son and daughter-in-law have expressed some concerns about your ability to live independently," he said, his pen scratching across a form on a clipboard. "Memory lapses, moments of disorientation, a general decline in cognitive function." I just stared at him, my heart starting to pound. It was all a lie. I forgot things sometimes, like anyone my age, but I wasn't disoriented. I wasn't in decline. This wasn't a medical diagnosis. It was character assassination. "That's not true," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. "I'm perfectly fine." Dr. Wesley shot a knowing glance at Olivia. "It's a common symptom of the condition," he said softly. "To her, not to me. The patient is often the last to realize." He then turned back to me, that predatory smile returning. "We're going to recommend a full-time care facility. It's for the best. You'll be safe and well taken care of." Michael's earlier words echoed in my mind. Cedar Brook Senior Living. This was it. This was the final move in their long, calculated chess game. They had found a doctor willing to declare me incompetent, a medical professional who would give them the legal ammunition they needed to seize control of my assets and my life. I looked at my son, my Michael, pleading with my eyes for him to step in, to stop this madness. He just stared at the floor, his hands shoved in his pockets, a portrait of pathetic cowardice. Olivia, however, was beaming. She wore an expression of triumphant sympathy. She placed a hand on my arm, her touch feeling like a hot coal. "Don't you worry, Angela. We'll take care of everything, the paperwork, the move. You just need to rest." That was the moment. The combination of her phony pity and my son's cowardly betrayal was the spark that lit the fuse. The fear that had been churning in my stomach was burned away by a sudden, white-hot fury. I was not a patient. I was not a problem to be managed. I was Angela, and I had built an empire from scratch. I had faced down corporate titans and outthought brilliant engineers. I would not be defeated by a greedy social climber and a spineless boy. I stood up. My movement was steady and deliberate. The doctor, Michael, and Olivia all looked up at me, surprised. I walked to the desk and looked down at the form on Dr. Wesley's clipboard. I saw the words, dementia, cognitive impairment, incapable of self-care. I picked up the heavy, ornate letter opener from my desk. A gift from James. It was cool and solid in my hand. I didn't brandish it like a weapon. I just held it. I looked Dr. Wesley directly in the eye. "Get out of my house," I said. My voice was no longer trembling. It was cold and hard as steel. "Get out now." He stammered, looking to Olivia for support, but she was too stunned to react. "Now, if you value your medical license," I added, my voice dangerously low, "you will take this fraudulent document and you will leave my home." And then I turned to Michael and Olivia. "This meeting is over, but our next conversation will be with my lawyer present." In that instant, I was no longer a victim. I was a queen, sitting on my mahogany throne, taking back control of my kingdom. The battle had just begun, and they had no idea the war that was coming. That night, sleep was an impossibility. The confrontation had left me energized, a current of adrenaline and righteous fury coursing through my veins. The house, which for so long had felt like a prison, now felt like a fortress. My fortress. I walked to the office that was James's. That was ours. The smell of old books and the faint aroma of pipe tobacco that still lingered in the air, even after 6 years, was a comforting embrace. I ran my hand over the worn leather of his armchair, the one where he used to sit and read me excerpts from the business journals, laughing at the pompous executives. It was in this room that we made all of our biggest decisions, and it was in this room that I would make my next one. I sat down at the large mahogany desk, not in his chair, but in mine. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged there. My mind, which they'd tried to convince me was failing, felt sharper than ever. I needed a plan. I needed a weapon. And I knew exactly where James would have left it for me. My eyes were drawn to a specific book on the shelf, a first edition of Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time. It had been my favorite, a book we discussed endlessly. James always used to say, "A paradigm shift, Angela. That's what you create. You don't just improve the old way, you invent a whole new one." I pulled the heavy volume from the shelf. It felt different in my hands, heavier than I remembered. Tucked into the back cover was not a bookmark, but a single, ornate, old-fashioned key. It wasn't the key to any door in this house. I knew instantly what it was for. It was the key to our safe deposit box at Liberty National Bank, the downtown branch. A box we opened together in 1974. A box I hadn't thought about in decades. Beneath the key was a simple, folded note in James's familiar, elegant handwriting. My hand trembled as I opened it. It read, "My dearest Angela, if you are reading this, it means the world has turned in a way I always feared, but prayed would never happen. They have forgotten who you are. Perhaps, my love, even you have started to forget. Don't let them. Remember the garage. Remember the patents. Remember the woman who was always 10 steps ahead of everyone, including me. Everything you need to remind them is in our box. Your strength was always the true foundation of Apex Innovations. It's time to take the wheel again. I love you forever, James." The tears that fell were not of sorrow, but of gratitude and a fierce, rekindled love. Even from beyond the grave, my husband was still my partner, still my greatest champion. He had foreseen this. He knew the weakness in our son and the rapacious greed in Olivia. He had left me a weapon. The next morning, I didn't dress in the soft cardigans Olivia expected of an old lady. I put on a navy blue power suit, the kind I used to wear to board meetings. I drove to the bank, my hands steady on the wheel of my old but immaculately kept Cadillac. The bank vault was cold, the air still and silent. The attendant used his key, then I used mine. The sound of the lock clicking open was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. The box was long and heavy. I slid it out and carried it to a private viewing room. My heart hammered against my ribs as I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a collection of documents. On top was the original Articles of Incorporation for Apex Innovations, dated 1971. And there it was, in clear, bold type. Founding partners, James Williams and Angela Williams. Shareholder distribution, James Williams, 48%. Angela Williams, 52%. 52%. I was the majority shareholder. I had always been the majority shareholder. Below the articles were the original patent filings for the microfabrication process, the technology that was still the bedrock of the company's multi-billion-dollar valuation. And my name was listed first. Lead inventor, Angela Williams. James had left his 48% to Michael in his will, but my 52% had never been touched, never mentioned. It was a dormant volcano, a sleeping giant. Michael and Olivia thought they were fighting over the crumbs of James's legacy. They had no idea they were living in my house, spending my money, and plotting to steal from the very woman who owned it all. A slow smile spread across my face. This was better than any letter opener. This was a paradigm shift. The game hadn't just changed. I was about to flip the whole damn board. Holding the documents, I felt a surge of power. But I also understood the gravity of the situation. This wasn't a simple family squabble I could win by revealing these papers at the next Sunday dinner. This was a corporate takeover and a declaration of war. Olivia and Michael had dug themselves in. Michael was the CEO of Apex Innovations, a title James had passed to him. Olivia had installed her friends and cronies in various positions. They had lawyers, accountants, and a carefully constructed narrative of my decline. I couldn't fight them alone. I needed an ally, someone who understood the law, the company, and most importantly, who understood the truth of my past with James. There was only one person who fit that description: Christopher Brooks. Christopher had been our lawyer for over 40 years. He was a sharp, no-nonsense man who had drafted the very articles of incorporation I now held in my hands. He had been there in the garage, a young lawyer in a rumpled suit, looking with wonder at our chaotic genius. He and James had been close friends. After James died, Michael and Olivia restructured the company's legal team, pushing Christopher out in favor of a slick, modern firm that was, of course, run by a friend of Olivia's father. They called it modernization. I knew it was a purge. They didn't want anyone around who remembered the truth. I hadn't spoken to Christopher in about 4 years, but I prayed he remembered me. I found his number in my old leather-bound address book. He was semi-retired now, with a small private practice in a modest building, a far cry from the glittering towers of Apex Innovations. When his secretary announced my name, there was a long pause before she put me through. "Angela?" His voice was hesitant, surprised. "Angela Williams, is that really you?" "It's me, Christopher," I said, my own voice thick with emotion. "I need your help." We met the next morning. His office was cozy, filled with books and framed pictures of his grandchildren. He had more gray hair and his face was more lined, but his eyes were the same, sharp, intelligent, and kind. He greeted me with a warmth I hadn't felt from anyone in years. "Angela, it's so good to see you," he said, taking both my hands. "I'm so sorry about... Well, I'm just sorry. When Michael's office informed me my services were no longer needed, I didn't waste time with small talk. I opened my briefcase and laid the documents on his desk. The articles of incorporation, the patent filings, James's letter. I told him everything. I told him about Olivia's insults, the slow isolation, the staged medical exam, and their plan to put me in a home. As he read and I talked, his expression shifted from nostalgic warmth to shock, and then to a cold, simmering fury. He put on his reading glasses and scrutinized the articles, his finger tracing the lines with our names. He looked at the patents, his eyes lingering on my signature. When he was done, he took off his glasses and looked up at me, his face grim. "The wolves are in the henhouse, Angela," he said quietly, "and they don't even realize they've been living there at the mercy of the eagle." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline, which was dominated by the gleaming Apex Innovations Tower. "I knew it," he said, more to himself than to me. "I never trusted that woman. She's all polish and no substance. And Michael? I'm sorry, Angela, but your son has become a fool. He let her lead him by the nose right into a den of thieves." He turned back to me, his eyes now burning with purpose. "They think you're a relic, a sweet old lady. They've forgotten you're the woman who stared down the engineers at Texas Instruments and made them blink. They've forgotten you're the one who solved the heat dissipation problem that had crippled the entire industry." He walked back to his desk and placed his hand firmly on the documents. "So, what do you want to do, Angela? Do you want to protect your assets? Protect your home?" I looked him straight in the eye. "I want my company back, Christopher. I want to expose them for the greedy, heartless frauds they are. I want to save the legacy James and I built from the vipers who are poisoning it from the inside." A slow, fierce smile spread across Christopher's face. It was a look I hadn't seen in years. The look of a fighter who's just been handed the perfect weapon. "Angela," he said, his voice full of awe and excitement, "it will be my absolute pleasure to help you do exactly that. They wanted to modernize. Fine. We'll give them a lesson in corporate governance they'll never forget. First things first. We need more than just old documents. We need to know what they're doing now. We need proof of their incompetence and their malice. We need a private investigator." The plan was starting to take shape. I had found my first soldier, the man who would help me build the perfect trap. Christopher recommended a man named Charles Hunter, a former Nashville PD detective who now ran a discreet but highly effective private investigation firm. Charles was the opposite of the slick, polished snakes Olivia surrounded herself with. He was a stocky man in his late 60s, with a face that looked like a map of bad neighborhoods and a quiet, observant demeanor that missed nothing. We met in Christopher's office. I told Charles my story, and he listened without interruption, his gaze steady and thoughtful. He didn't offer sympathy. He offered a solution. "They think you're invisible, Mrs. Williams," he said when I was done. "That's our biggest advantage. They won't be looking for you. They'll be looking for outside threats from business rivals. They'll never suspect the threat is coming from the rocking chair in the living room." His words sent a shiver of empowerment through me. For the first time, my age and perceived frailty weren't a weakness, but a shield. Charles's investigation began immediately, and it was devastatingly effective. Within a week, the first reports started coming in. They were delivered to me by Christopher in sealed manila envelopes. Reading them was like peeling back the layers of an infected wound. Charles started with their finances. My son, Michael, as CEO, had an exorbitant salary of $950,000 a year. But even that couldn't explain their spending. Charles's forensic accountant uncovered a web of shell corporations and offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. They were systematically siphoning money out of Apex Innovations, disguising it as consulting fees and marketing expenses paid to companies that were secretly owned by Olivia's father. They were bleeding my company dry to fund their lavish lifestyle. Olivia's quarterly shopping trips to Milan and London, which cost upwards of $150,000 each. A new $320,000 Ferrari for Michael. A $1.5 million down payment on a yacht they had named the Olivia. Every transaction was a dagger in my heart. The money they were stealing wasn't just money. It was James's sweat, my sleepless nights. It was the risk we took, the life we built. They were squandering it on designer shoes and fleeting status symbols. But Charles didn't stop there. He put Michael and Olivia under surveillance. The reports were accompanied by photographs and audio recordings. I saw pictures of Olivia meeting with developers, laughing as they discussed plans to demolish my home and build a set of luxury condominiums. I heard my son's voice on a recording, speaking with an art dealer about selling the paintings in my house. "She'll never even notice they're gone," Michael said, his voice dripping with the casual cruelty that had become his trademark. "Her mind's basically shot. The most damning evidence came from a bug Charles's team managed to plant in Michael's office at the Apex Tower. It was a conversation between my son and his wife, recorded just 4 days after that disastrous Sunday dinner. Olivia was furious that I had kicked them out. How dare she? Olivia's voice was a shrill shriek. That ungrateful old hag. After everything we've done for her. We need to accelerate the plan, Michael. That quack Dr. Wesley is getting nervous. We need to get the power of attorney signed before she does something crazy like talk to a real lawyer. Michael's response was what truly broke me. I know, he said, his voice weary. It's just, she's my mother. She's an obstacle, Michael, Olivia snapped back. She's a senile old woman sitting on our future. Our future. Do you want to be answering to a board of directors for the rest of your life, or do you want to own it all? We're this close to being free. Don't go soft on me now. I sat there in Christopher's office, the transcript in my trembling hands. The words blurred through my tears. He had called me mother. A fleeting moment of conscience, but it was immediately crushed under the weight of Olivia's greed. I wasn't a person to them. I was an obstacle, a problem to be solved. Christopher put a comforting hand on my shoulder. This is everything we need, Angela, he said, his voice firm. This is fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy. It's a slam dunk. We've got them. I wiped my tears, the sorrow hardening once again into determination. He was right. My grief was a luxury I could no longer afford. It was time to stop collecting evidence. It was time to build the trap. With Charles's portfolio of evidence, a thick binder full of financial records, surveillance photos, and damning transcripts, the mood in Christopher Brooks's office shifted from investigation to strategic planning. It felt like a war room. We spread the documents across his large conference table, the gleaming Apex Tower visible through the window, a constant reminder of what was at stake. They're arrogant, Charles said, tapping a photo of Olivia stepping out of a limousine. They're careless. They believe their own press releases. They think you're locked up in that house, knitting and waiting to die. They'll never see this coming. The evidence of financial malfeasance is overwhelming, Christopher added, pointing to a flowchart of the shell companies. We could go straight to the district attorney. They'd both be facing serious prison time. I considered it. The image of them being led away in handcuffs was undeniably satisfying, but it felt incomplete. A quiet, legalistic victory wouldn't be enough. They had tried to humiliate me, to erase me, to declare me invisible and insane in the eyes of the world they cared so much about. Their punishment had to be as public as their ambition. Their downfall had to be a spectacle. No, I said, my voice low but firm. That comes later. First, I want to confront them. I want to watch their world crumble before their very eyes. I want the people whose respect they crave to see them for what they are. Christopher and Charles exchanged a look, and I saw a glimmer of deep respect in their eyes. They understood. This wasn't just about justice. It was about reclamation. A public reckoning, Christopher mused, a slow smile spreading across his face. I like it. But where and how? We spent the next 2 hours brainstorming, crafting a plan like a complex science experiment, controlling every variable. The target event had to be one of their own making, a stage they built for their own glorification. And as it happened, they had provided the perfect one. Olivia was chairing a major fundraising gala for the Modern Art Museum, the one her mother presided over. It was the social event of the season to be held in the museum's grand ballroom. She had been planning it for months, and it was designed to be her coronation as the new queen of the city's philanthropic scene. That's our stage, I declared. She wants to be a legacy builder. Fine, let's give her a legacy she'll never escape. The plan we devised was meticulous. It would unfold in 3 acts. Act 1, the lull. I would call Michael and Olivia. I would sound defeated, frightened, and apologetic. I would tell them they were right, that I was overwhelmed, and that I was ready to sign the power of attorney and move into Cedar Brook. I would agree to do it at a final family meeting at the house a few hours before their precious gala. This would make them feel safe, victorious, and completely off guard. Act 2, the ambush. At the house, they would arrive with their lawyer, expecting a broken woman. But they would find me with Christopher Brooks. We wouldn't reveal everything, just enough to rattle them. Christopher would inform them that there were some irregularities in the corporate accounts that needed to be resolved and that my signature on any documents was on hold, pending a full audit. This would plant a seed of panic, ruining their triumphant mood just before their big event. They would go to the gala stressed and paranoid, but still believing they were in control. Act 3. The Annihilation. This was the main event. At the gala, during Olivia's keynote speech, we would strike. Christopher had a contact on the museum's board, an old friend who was deeply concerned by Olivia's aggressive and flashy management style. He would ensure Christopher had a moment at the podium to make a special announcement on behalf of the true majority shareholder of Apex Innovations. While all eyes were on the stage, Charles's team would discreetly deliver sealed envelopes to key people in the room: the museum board members, the city's most influential journalists, the top business leaders, and, of course, Olivia's mother. The envelopes would contain a summary of the evidence: the embezzlement, the conspiracy, the fraud. "We are going to destroy them in front of their entire world," Christopher said, his voice laced with a cold fire. "When the sun comes up, their names will be mud. They won't have just lost the company, they'll have lost their precious reputation. They will be ruined, completely and utterly." I looked at the plan before me. It was ruthless, it was devastating, and it was perfect. "Let's begin," I said. "I have a phone call to make." Playing the part of the defeated old woman was the most challenging role of my life. I dialed Michael's number, my heart beating a steady, martial rhythm against my ribs. I'd rehearsed my lines with Christopher, practicing the slight tremor in my voice, the weary resignation in my tone. When Michael answered, he sounded wary, suspicious. "Mom? What is it?" "Michael," I began, letting out a shaky sigh. I've been doing a lot of thinking. You were right. You and Olivia." I paused, letting the silence hang in the air. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. "You were right about everything," I continued, my voice barely a whisper. "This house is too much for me. I'm so tired of fighting. I'm ready to do whatever you think is best." There was another pause, longer this time. I could picture him holding the phone, a look of disbelief on his face, turning to Olivia with wide eyes. I heard her muffled voice in the background, sharp and excited. "Is she?" Michael came back on the line, his voice now oozing a fake, syrupy concern that made my stomach churn. "Oh, Mom, we're so glad you've come to your senses. We were so worried. We just want what's best for you." "I know, dear," I lied. Could you and Olivia come by on Saturday before your big party? We can have your lawyer here and I'll sign whatever papers are necessary. Let's just get it over with." "Of course, Mom, of course," he said, the relief in his voice palpable. "We'll be there at 3:00. You just rest until then. We'll take care of everything from now on." I hung up the phone, my hand steady. I didn't feel a shred of guilt. I felt the cold, clean satisfaction of a scientist setting the final, critical piece of an experiment into place. The next 2 days were a whirlwind of preparation. Christopher, Charles, and I finalized the contents of the envelopes. We included the most damning evidence: copies of the wire transfers to the offshore accounts, a transcript of the recorded conversation from Michael's office, and a cover letter from Christopher's firm announcing an emergency shareholders meeting and my immediate reinstatement as chairwoman of the board of Apex Innovations, exercising my 52% stake. On Saturday afternoon, I waited for them. I wore a simple gray cashmere dress, making myself look small and frail in the large living room armchair. At precisely 3:00, the doorbell rang. It was them, accompanied by a smug-looking lawyer in a suit that was too expensive for his age. Olivia swept into the room, a vision in a blood-red gown, already dressed for her gala. She looked around the room, not with nostalgia, but with the cold, calculating eye of a new owner. "Angela," she said, her voice dripping with condescending sweetness, "I'm so glad you've decided to be sensible." Michael avoided my eyes, busying himself with his briefcase. Their lawyer placed a thick stack of documents on the coffee table. The top page was clearly visible: durable power of attorney. They believed they had won. Their arrogance was so complete, so blind, they didn't even notice the second tea service I had laid out. They didn't question why I was so calm. As their lawyer began to explain the documents in a slow, patronizing tone, the doorbell rang again. Michael looked up, annoyed. "Are you expecting someone, Mom?" "As a matter of fact, I am," I said quietly. My housekeeper, who was in on the plan, opened the door, and in walked Christopher Brooks, carrying a fine leather briefcase. Michael and Olivia froze. Their lawyer's jaw dropped. The color drained from Michael's face. "Mr. Brooks," he stammered. What are you doing here?" Christopher smiled, a thin, dangerous smile. "Michael, Olivia, I'm here representing my oldest client, Mrs. Angela Williams." He placed his briefcase on the table next to their documents, the sound of leather hitting wood like a gavel. "It has come to our attention," Christopher said, his voice a calm, level baritone that sliced through the tension, "that there are some profound financial irregularities in the corporate accounts of Apex Innovations. We have also uncovered a rather disturbing conspiracy regarding our client's health and assets." Olivia's face, which had been a mask of triumph, was now a canvas of pure shock and dawning horror. "Before Mrs. Williams signs anything," Christopher continued, gesturing to their pile of papers, "we will be conducting a full, independent forensic audit of the company. Effective immediately, all executive spending is frozen, and a temporary restraining order is being filed to prevent the sale or transfer of any assets, including this house." He let the words sink in. The trap was sprung. Their victory had turned to ash in their mouths. They would go to their party not as conquerors, but as cornered, terrified animals, and the worst was yet to come. The grand ballroom of the Modern Art Museum was a sea of glittering jewels and clinking champagne glasses. A string quartet played softly in the corner, the epitome of the cultured, high society world Olivia so desperately wanted to conquer. She and Michael stood at the receiving line, their faces frozen in pained smiles. From my vantage point, in a discreetly parked vehicle across the street with Charles, I could see the panic in their eyes. They greeted guests, laughed at jokes, and accepted compliments on the beautiful decor. But their movements were stiff, their eyes constantly darting to the entrance. They were waiting for the other shoe to drop. They had no idea it was going to be a guillotine. At 9 o'clock, as the guests were seated for dinner, Christopher Brooks made his entrance. He was not on the guest list, but his +1 was. Marcus Thorne, the venerable and universally respected chairman of the museum's board of trustees. Christopher's presence sent a ripple of confusion through the room. He was a ghost from the company's past, a man who wasn't supposed to be there. I watched on a small monitor, fed by a camera from one of Charles's operatives disguised as a waiter. I saw Olivia's smile falter, a flicker of pure terror crossing her face. She whispered frantically to Michael, who looked like he was about to be sick. They endured the dinner, the polite conversation, the endless parade of courses. Every minute was an agony for them, the suspense stretching them to the breaking point. Finally, the moment came. Marcus Thorne approached the podium to introduce the evening's hostess and keynote speaker. "And now," he said, his voice booming through the hall, "it is my pleasure to introduce the woman whose vision has made this incredible evening possible, the chair of our fundraising committee, Mrs. Olivia Williams." Polite scattered applause filled the room. Olivia walked to the stage, her red dress a slash of color against the white backdrop. She looked out at the sea of faces, the most powerful people in the city, her people. This was supposed to be her moment. She began her speech, her voice a little shaky at first, but growing in confidence as she fell into her rehearsed lines about art and legacy and philanthropy. She spoke of her family's commitment to the community, even mentioning the great legacy of her late father-in-law, James Williams. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. As she reached the climax of her speech, Marcus Thorne quietly returned to the stage and whispered something in her ear. Olivia's face went white. She tried to wave him off, but he was insistent. Reluctantly, she stepped away from the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus announced, "we have a surprise special announcement tonight from a distinguished guest, Mr. Christopher Brooks, on behalf of the Williams family and Apex Innovations." Christopher walked to the podium. He looked calm, distinguished, and utterly in command. The room was buzzing with confusion. "Thank you, Marcus," Christopher began. "I am here tonight on behalf of the true heart and soul of Apex Innovations, a woman whose genius has been the silent engine of its success for over 50 years. Olivia stared, her mouth slightly agape. This was not going according to plan. While we all honor the memory of the great James Williams, Christopher continued, history has neglected his equal partner, his co-founder, and since the company's inception, its majority shareholder. A collective gasp went through the hall. The journalists in the room were sitting bolt upright, their pens scribbling furiously. A woman who sacrificed her own public recognition to raise a family, but never ever relinquished ownership of the empire she built. I am speaking, of course, of Mrs. Angela Williams. As Christopher said my name, Charles's agents, dressed as museum staff, moved silently and efficiently through the room. They placed the sealed manila envelopes on the tables in front of the key individuals we had targeted. They opened them, their eyes widening in shock as they read the contents. I saw Olivia's mother's face contort into a mask of horror and disbelief as she scanned the bank statements. Unfortunately, Christopher's voice boomed through the speakers, the legacy Mrs. Williams and her husband built is under attack from within. For the past 6 years, the company has been systematically defrauded, with millions of dollars funneled into offshore accounts by its current CEO, Michael Williams, and his wife, Olivia. All eyes turned to Michael and Olivia. They were pinned in the spotlight, their faces a gruesome tableau of guilt and terror. This was done to fund a lifestyle of grotesque excess, Christopher continued, his voice dripping with contempt, and was part of a larger conspiracy to have the company's true owner, Mrs. Angela Williams, fraudulently declared mentally incompetent so they could seize total control of her assets. A wave of shocked, angry murmurs swept the room. People were getting to their feet, staring at the couple on stage with disgust. Olivia's carefully constructed world, her entire identity, was being dismantled, atomized in front of the very people she had so desperately tried to impress. She looked at Michael, her eyes blazing with hatred, and he flinched away from her. The spell was broken. Christopher delivered the final, crushing blow. As of this morning, Mrs. Angela Williams, as the 52% majority shareholder, has called an emergency meeting of the board. She has voted to remove Michael Williams as CEO, effective immediately, and has reassumed her rightful place as chairwoman of Apex Innovations. Furthermore, this evidence, he said, holding up a copy of the binder Charles had compiled, has been turned over to the district attorney's office. I believe their investigators are waiting outside. The beautiful, elegant gala had become a crime scene, and its queen was now just a common thief, exposed for all the world to see. Vengeance wasn't just complete, it was poetic. The fallout on stage was a maelstrom of ugly human desperation. The carefully maintained facade of the perfect couple shattered into a million pieces under the glare of 100 accusing eyes. Olivia, for a moment, was paralyzed, her face a frozen mask of disbelief. Then her survival instincts kicked in, and they were as vicious as a cornered rat's. She turned on Michael. Her voice, no longer cultured and smooth, but a raw, guttural shriek that echoed through the now silent hall. "You!" she screamed, jabbing a finger at him. "This is your fault! You weak, pathetic mama's boy! You were supposed to handle her!" Michael, who had been standing as if he'd been turned to stone, flinched as if she'd struck him. The accusation, the public emasculation, finally broke through his cowardly paralysis. He lunged back at her, his voice cracking with panic and rage. "My fault? I did this for you. All of it. The yacht, the parties, the clothes. You were the one who was never satisfied. You were the one who pushed and pushed." Their argument was a torrent of venom and recrimination. They threw every secret, every resentment at each other. "You're the one who hired that fraudulent doctor," Michael yelled. "You told me she had dementia." Olivia shot back, her laugh hysterical and wild. "And you believed me because you wanted to, because you've always been jealous of your mother's mind, a mind you never inherited." The crowd watched, mesmerized by the sheer spectacle of their implosion. This was better than any performance art the museum could ever hope to display. It was raw, it was real, and it was glorious. Olivia's mother, a woman who looked as though she'd been carved from ice, rose from her table. Her face was a stiff mask of fury and shame. She did not rush to her daughter's side. Instead, she turned and walked with a stiff, regal gait toward the nearest exit, refusing to even look at the disgrace her daughter had become. That was, for Olivia, the final betrayal. The one person whose approval she coveted above all else was abandoning her. She seemed to shrink, the fight draining out of her, her shriek diminishing into ragged, desperate sobs. She sank to the stage floor, her beautiful red dress pooling around her like blood. A broken queen on a fallen throne. Michael just stood there, staring at the wreckage he had made of his life, his face pale and slick with sweat. He looked out at the crowd, at the faces of his former friends and colleagues, and saw nothing but contempt. He had traded his mother's love and his father's legacy for this woman, and she had led him to utter ruin. Security guards were moving toward the stage now, their movements calm and professional. The party was over. As I watched on the monitor, I felt no pity. I felt a deep, cleansing sense of relief. The poison that had been infecting my family for years was finally being purged. The beautiful, elegant ballroom had become their public pillory, the perfect, ironic stage for their self-inflicted downfall. The legal and social aftermath was swift and brutal. As Christopher had promised, investigators from the DA's white-collar crime unit were waiting discreetly in the museum lobby. They didn't make a scene. They simply approached Michael and Olivia as they were being escorted off the stage by museum security and informed them in low, professional tones that they were to accompany them downtown for questioning. The photograph that ran on the front page of the city's business journal the next morning was devastating. Olivia, mascara running, hair disheveled, being guided into an unmarked car, her face a mask of utter humiliation. The headline was simple and savage: "The Williams Empire Strikes Back." The legal case was, as Christopher had predicted, a slam dunk. Faced with the overwhelming evidence of embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy, Michael crumbled. In exchange for a lighter sentence, he agreed to testify against his wife, painting a picture of a man manipulated and controlled by a masterfully greedy woman. It was a cowardly act, but it was the first useful thing he'd done in years. Olivia's defense was to plead ignorance, to claim she was just a wife who trusted her husband's business acumen. But the recordings, the paper trail leading to her father's shell companies, and the testimony of the now terrified Dr. Wesley, who quickly cooperated to save his own skin, sealed her fate. Michael was sentenced to 5 to 7 years in a medium-security federal prison for embezzlement. He lost everything: his job, his reputation, and the respect of everyone he'd ever known. Olivia, as the architect of the conspiracy, received a harsher sentence: 10 to 15 years. Her father was implicated as well and faced his own set of charges, his shady business empire crumbling under the sudden, intense scrutiny. Their assets were frozen and seized. The yacht was sold at auction. Their half-built mansion went into foreclosure. They were legally, financially, and socially bankrupt. For me, the justice wasn't just in their prison sentences. It was in the complete and total demolition of the false world they had built. The society friends who once flocked to Olivia's parties now crossed the street to avoid making eye contact with her. The gossip columns that once chronicled her every move with breathless excitement now detailed her spectacular fall from grace with cruel delight. She had sought a legacy, and I had given her one. She would forever be remembered as a cautionary tale, a cheap grifter who overestimated her own intelligence and profoundly underestimated that of an 85-year-old woman. The law had done its work. The scales, which had been so horribly unbalanced, were now level. The world had been set right. Now I had an empire to rebuild. The 2 years that followed were a whirlwind of activity, a renaissance I never expected to have in the 9th decade of my life. Stepping back into the role of chairwoman of Apex Innovations felt like coming home. The company had lost its way under Michael's lackluster leadership, growing complacent and bureaucratic. I came in like a storm, shaking up the boardroom, firing Olivia's incompetent cronies, and pouring resources back into the research and development department, the heart and soul of the company. I found that the scientific mind, once sharpened, never truly dulls. I spent my days with brilliant young engineers and physicists, my mind once again alive with the thrill of innovation and discovery. We launched a new division focused on sustainable energy, a field James and I had often discussed. It was a way to honor his forward-thinking spirit while building a better future. I was no longer a ghost in my own house. I was a force in the world once more. The house itself was transformed. The heavy, dark curtains Olivia had despised were taken down, not to be replaced by her sterile, modern vision, but to let the sunlight flood in. The oppressive silence was gone, replaced by the sounds of lively debate, of laughter, and of my granddaughter Chloe's voice. Chloe, Michael's daughter, had been away at college during the worst of the turmoil. She had been shielded from her mother's toxic influence and had always maintained a quiet, loving relationship with me. After the scandal broke, she was devastated, but she reached out to me, her heart full of shame and confusion. I welcomed her with open arms. I saw in her the best of Michael, the kindness he once possessed, and a sharp, inquisitive mind that reminded me so much of myself. I began to mentor her, just as I had once mentored Michael. I brought her into the company as an intern, letting her sit in on meetings, explaining the complex science behind our products. She was a natural, her mind soaking everything up like a sponge. I saw the pride in her eyes, not just for the company, but for me, her grandmother. She was finally learning the truth of her own legacy. We'd spend evenings in the office, not in silence, but in animated conversation, sketching ideas on a whiteboard I had installed. The 2 chairs at the desk were occupied once again. I didn't sell the house. Instead, I filled it with life. I hosted salons for young scientists, fundraisers for my literacy foundation, and loud, joyous dinner parties for my old friends, the ones Olivia had tried to push away. They rallied around me with a loyalty that brought tears to my eyes. My life at 87 was fuller and more meaningful than it had been at 67. I learned that purpose is not a finite resource that runs out with age. It's a fire within, and as long as you have breath, you have the ability to tend that flame. The world tried to discard me, to put me in a box labeled old, frail, and finished. But I refused their definition. I wrote my own. In the quiet hours of the night, when the house is still and the day's work is done, I often find myself in the office, just thinking. I think about the long, winding path of my life, the incredible highs and the devastating lows. I used to believe that the greatest sacrifice I ever made was stepping away from my career to raise my son. I saw it as a choice between 2 loves, a path taken that meant another was lost forever. Now I know I was wrong. The greatest sacrifice I made was allowing myself to become invisible. It wasn't one single decision, but a slow erosion over many years. I sacrificed my voice for peace. I sacrificed my opinions for harmony. I sacrificed my own sense of self-worth on the altar of a family that, in the end, didn't value the gift. I learned that kindness and love must be built on a foundation of respect, and respect begins with yourself. By allowing Olivia and Michael to diminish me, I participated in my own erasure. I taught them that my boundaries were flexible, that my feelings were secondary, that my legacy was negotiable. The insult Olivia hurled at me that night, "You're not even half the woman my mother is," was designed to be the final nail in my coffin of irrelevance. But instead, it became my resurrection. It forced me to remember the other half of myself I had put away. The scientist, the inventor, the founder, the fighter. It forced me to reintegrate my own being, to become whole again. The lesson I've taken from all of this is that a person's worth is not determined by their age, their gender, or the role they play in someone else's life. It's inherent. It's non-negotiable. Dignity is not something that can be given to you or taken away. It can only be surrendered. And I've learned that it is never, ever too late to reclaim it. True family isn't defined by blood, but by loyalty, by respect, and by a love that seeks to build you up, not tear you down. I lost a son, but I gained a deeper, more honest relationship with my granddaughter, and I reconnected with the true friends who had been there all along. Most importantly, I rediscovered myself. The woman who looks back at me from the mirror now is not a fragile old lady. She is a survivor. She is a leader. She is a creator. Her hair is silver, and her face is etched with the map of a long, complex life. But her eyes sparkle with purpose. I am not half a woman. I am two halves of a whole, finally reunited, and that is a force no one can ever take from me again. Today, 2 years later, I'm living a life I never imagined was possible. Michael is in prison, where he'll be for at least a few more years. They lost everything they tried to steal from me, and on top of that, they had to watch their phony empire of social status turn to dust. I've learned that real strength isn't about avoiding the storm, but about learning to dance in the rain. And sometimes, the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born into. And you, what would you have done in my place? Do you think I did the right thing? Let me know in the comments what city you're listening from. And if you liked my story, please give this video a thumbs up so I can keep bringing you more stories like this. Thank you for all the love. On the screen, you'll see other stories I'm sure you'll enjoy. Go ahead and click to watch. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe. Until the next story.